Think incest is cute? How about inbreeding? If it's a societal taboo for humans, why do we allow it for dogs? That's next on the PETA podcast with Emil Guillermo. Welcome to the PETA podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo, your host for this inside look at animal rights. Brought to you by PETA, the largest animal rights organization in the world. On this episode, incest, inbreeding. Apply to humans and it's a disgusting taboo. For dogs, it's the way to cater to consumers' taste for dogs with a scrunched face and internal organs. Cute? Only if you insist on dogs with deformities that cause health issues that could tax your canine love. It's French Bulldogs, Pugs, Shar-Peis, the so-called breathing impaired breeds. BIBs are what they're called, and they're money makers. But considering the health issues to dogs, it's time their breeding must end. And that's going to take public education on what's called torture breeding. And by the way, AKC is not okay. I talked to PETA's Jakob Shaw about how to stop the rise of breathing impaired breeds through torture breeding. My conversation with Jakob on this edition of the PETA podcast with Emil Guillermo. BIBs. Do you call them BIBs still, or is that just a convenient acronym? Because, yeah, it's kind of cute. BIBs, the BIBs.
So I actually always say breathing impaired breeds because if there's one thing we want people to understand about these dogs, it's that the snorting and wheezing sounds that you hear them make really are the sounds of a dog struggling to get enough air through restricted windpipes and nasal passages. So if you know nothing else about, French bulldogs, English bulldogs, pugs, Boston terriers, Shih Tzus, even boxers, all of these flat-faced dogs, it's that they spend their lives struggling to breathe.
Yeah, and so those are the breeds, right? Those are the specific breeds. Any others you want to mention them all here, or any possible breeds that would be under the category of breathing impaired dogs?
So those really are the most popular of the breathing impaired breeds. And French bulldogs actually have been the most purchased dog in the United States for the last 3 years in a row, despite being the most congenitally unhealthy breed, who spends their lives just struggling to get enough air into their lungs. And that's why we hear them constantly making these wheezing, gasping sounds.
See, now this is the thing about it, that they are the most popular breed because breeders are breeding, they're for sale. You don't go to can you go to a French Bulldog rescue and get your dog?
Absolutely. So, I think it actually might help for me to sketch out some of the health issues that these dogs suffer from, because as a result of these congenital issues, the cost of veterinary care for breathing impaired breeds is just astronomically high. So many of these dogs end up in shelters because people purchase them from breeders, not knowing the health issues that these dogs are bound to suffer from. They can't afford the veterinary expenses, and then they bring them to shelters.
So that's why you get rescues, and that's why you see them all in the shelters, because they're hard dogs to be companions to, or people get into them because I guess the look, right? They like the look, or they like the idea of, oh, I've got a French Bulldog. It's like a gourmet dog in some ways. But then it's expensive because of the health issues.
Exactly. And we now have this phenomenon of bulldog-specific rescues or pug-specific rescues that only exists because breeders have been churning out more and more of these unhealthy, deformed dogs, selling them to people who can't give them the care, don't have the resources to pay for the veterinary care that they need. And that's why they end up in shelters.
And these people who buy them, they could go to the shelter and find it, but they say, oh, we're going to get a better one. We're going to go to a breeder. And they keep the breeders in business, which keep the shelters full when these people can't. It's a cycle. And what happens to the dogs? They end up in an unhealthy state and with no human companion, and they end up euthanized, and it's not a good story for the bulldogs.
Exactly. And dogs didn't evolve to have these completely unnaturally flat, smushed in faces.
Mhm.
There's no evolutionary benefit for a dog to have a flat face. That makes it harder for them to eat, to drink, to breathe, to sleep. They only look this way because breeders have intentionally bred them to have these cartoonishly flat skulls. And then they've sold the public on these being popular looks, which is why we've seen these dogs become increasingly popular, despite the fact that they're increasingly unhealthy.
All right, now I want to get into, the science of, or the biology of the breathing impairment. But the fact is, like you said, it's a two-way street. The breeders know what appeals to people. People are kind of suckers for the look. I know people who own French bulldogs. When I see them walk their dogs, I have friends or acquaintances. They say, "Oh, our pugs, our French bulldog." They love them, right? That's sort of the when you have animal companions. That's what happens. But I don't want to bring up the fact that you have a really a modified a dog who's been modified to the point where it's unhealthy for both them and your veterinary pocketbook, but how do you approach people and say, hey, I guess they know already, right? I mean, they're not saying, but they know the reality of owning a pug or a bulldog.
Interestingly enough, a lot of the people who have become the most vocal advocates for banning the breeding of these breeding impaired breeds and encouraging everyone to never buy one, these are the guardians of these dogs, the people
Mhm.
who know and love them and have spent the most time with them because they see how from the time that they're just a few months old, they spend every day of their lives just trying to get enough air into their lungs. And it makes it impossible for these dogs to do the most basic things that make a dog's life joyful and fulfilling. Anyone who has a healthy dog knows how much it means to their dog to play with other dogs, to go run around at the park, to go for a walk, smell things. But
Mhm.
for these breathing impaired dogs, they can't even do those most basic things.
I mean, because really, scent work. I mean, that's a real thing. That gets your dog tired when they smell, and that's their activity. So these breathing impaired dogs can't even do that well. Huh?
Exactly. I mean, it impairs really so many of their most fundamental, like anatomical functions.
Mm.
And the breathing impairment has all of these knock-on effects that it has horrible effects on their spinal health, their neurological health. I mean, because they have these smushed in skulls, they still have the same number of teeth, but they're trying to squeeze them into a much smaller jaw. So they have dental issues. I mean, the list of health ailments that they suffer from is almost endless.
And you can't really have that kind of dog unless you do something to it, right? I mean, then if they were to not do anything to a dog and just let it be, you'd have a normal dog with a normal face and normal teeth, but they want a pug look or a French bulldog look, and so suddenly you're doing stuff. What are they doing? What are they doing and then how does it impact the breathing of these dogs?
Right. Well, not too long ago, it would have just been completely unthinkable to intentionally breed dogs to have physical features that cause them to suffer just for the sake of their looks. But that's exactly what we've seen happen with these breathing impaired dogs. And it's also what we see happen with German shepherds who are intentionally bred to have these sloped backs that cause hip dysplasia. We see it with dachshunds who have these long backs, short legs, and as a result have a fragile, injury prone spine. So many of the most popular dogs in the country have these avoidable, predictable health issues that are only there because breeders are intentionally breeding them to look increasingly cartoonish and unnatural.
What do they have to do to get that look? I mean, when they breed them, how do they how do they get that face in that way? They've got to genetically modify or they suppress something. What's the biology that determines that look? Because when you think about it, it's the breeders are I mean, if you don't like GMO food and if you don't like the idea of a Frankenstein monster, Why would you like a breathing impaired dog? They're doing something to this dog. What are they doing?
Well, so first off, I mean, purebred dogs really are inbred dogs, and it's just as bad of an idea for dogs as it is for humans. The reason why all purebred dogs, flat-faced or not, suffer from these congenital health issues is that they're drawn from too small of a gene pool. So whenever someone talks about their dog's pedigree, they're really talking about the fact that their dog is the result of incest. And you know,
I mean, when you said that, the small gene pool, I said, oh, he's talking about inbreeding, which doesn't sound as bad as incest. And when you hear the word incest, you say, that's the red light that starts flashing.
right. And to go back to your initial question about, how are they doing this to the breeding impaired breeds in particular? If you look at photos of Boston Terriers and French Bulldogs from, 70 years ago, you can see that they have much longer snouts. But because breeders, that is, are always looking to try to popularize these more extreme and cartoonish looks, they're choosing the dogs with the shortest snouts, the most extreme features, and selectively breeding those dogs, which is why we've seen these breeds get more and more and more unhealthy, which most importantly means that the suffering that these dogs experience on a daily basis is worse now in 2025 than it's ever been before. So considering how much so many of us love and care about dogs, this is just a morally unjustifiable practice that we need to stop as soon as we can.
Well, if it stands to reason, if you don't want genetically modified food, why would you want a genetically modified dog?
Especially when there are 70 million homeless and unwanted dogs and cats in shelters around the country who need your help if you're the kind of person who wants to add a dog to your family and has the time and resources to provide a good life for them. Every single day in shelters around the country, there are the most amazing, sweet, adoptable dogs who are just waiting for someone to walk in, fall in love with them, and provide them with a loving home. Breeders are the absolute worst thing for those dogs. They're steering people away and trying to convince them that these quote unquote purebred, which, remember just means inbred dogs, are something like superior merchandise.
Right, because they know what people like. They breed to that preference that people have, but it's really a preference that comes out of ignorance. If people knew that, hey, this is inbreeding, people laugh when they say, oh, inbreeding, because when they talk about inbred humans, they don't necessarily think about the royal family. They might think of some backward family here in the US, but inbreeding is one thing. When you talk about incest, what it really is, then people start getting that, oh, we got to take the moral high ground. We allowed for humans, or well, we're upset with humans. Why would we allow incest among dogs? But then that's the same thing about the logic about, we wouldn't, we eat meat and because it's okay, because they're just animals. And so it's they're just animals thing allows people to ignore the morality of this. But what if people really knew that they were incestual, that was inbreeding, that it was GMO in a way? Uh, if people knew that, would they be attracted to these dogs?
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, this is an issue where the more people learn about this, the more horrified they are. When they realize that, for these dogs with a smushed in nose, breathing through their nose is like trying to suck in air through a tiny straw, and that every day of their lives, these dogs are fighting just to get a deep breath. I mean, no one, when confronted with that information, is anything other than horrified and devastated for these dogs. And I think going back to what you were mentioning before, I think a way to frame it is, there's a big difference between two humans deciding to have a family and breeders selectively breeding dogs to have more and more extreme, unnatural, unhealthy features that is going to sentence their puppies to lifetimes of suffering because they're going to have these deformed bodies that don't work. I mean, just one thing that helps to paint this picture is that their bodies have become so deformed over the years of breeding that French bulldogs and English bulldogs, they can't even give birth naturally. So 80% of them are delivered via C-section.
Mm.
So that's part of why the cost of veterinary care is so astronomically high. And again, going back to what we were talking about before, that's why so many of them end up in shelters.
Yeah, I just think that people, when they want a dog, they want an animal companion. They feel that there's a connection when they see a face, and then they think, oh, those French bulldogs are so cute, or the pugs are so cute, and then they get that attachment. But I really think that if there was a label, like a product of incest, product of inbreeding, or get a non-GMO dog. This is genetically mod. If people knew. Oh, no matter how cute, people would say it's best for the dog. I want that other mutt. I want that other dog. Like you said, there's so many dogs at the shelter, so many dogs to be rescued. We have an overpopulation problem. So, how well is PETA doing in terms of educating the public about what's going on with these dogs?
So we're seeing a lot of amazing progress here. So veterinarians have been sounding the alarm about the suffering that these dogs experience when they're intentionally bred to have deformed features for years. And that's why European countries like Germany, Austria, Switzerland, and the Netherlands all already have laws that restrict this practice, which they refer to as torture breeding. But up until recently, we didn't have any similar legislation here in the US. But after PETA worked closely with their city council, the city of Ojai, California last year passed the first torture breeding ban in the United States called the Companion Animal Protection Ordinance, which is designed to protect dogs and cats from being bred to have these features that will make them, breathing impaired, that will cause them to have, lifelong spinal issues like intervertebral disc disease, because like in the case with dachshunds, they're bred to have these long backs. So we are seeing a lot of progress being made on this front.
All right. I know about the Ojai case. I remember when it happened, and I thought, okay, Ojai, it's, not exactly Glendale, California, which is in the Southern California area outside of LA, and it's slightly bigger than Ojai. It's not exactly, it's not even Berkeley. It's small. Ojai, it's a small little community. But is that a model for other cities to then look at and say, yeah, we're going to adopt it just like Ojai? And are you getting much traction from bigger cities, bigger municipalities saying, well, if Ojai did it, we can do it?
Absolutely. So we're seeing this sort of enter onto the radar of elected officials around the country. There was actually a statewide law that was being considered in New Hampshire that, even though it didn't pass, it did receive a lot of support in the New Hampshire House of Representatives.
Hmm.
I think this is just an issue where so many people still don't understand that when they're hearing a dog snort and wheeze, that is a dog who is struggling for each and every breath. And the more people who learn about how these dogs are suffering just for the sake of their looks, the closer we get to similar laws being passed in other cities, other states, and eventually nationwide.
See, here's the thing, Jacob. When people hear those snorts, they think, oh, how cute. The cute dog is snorting. That's so natural. That's what they're thinking. But it's not, is it?
Not in the least bit. I mean, the sound you're hearing is literally the sound of air trying to squeeze through a restricted airway. So let me give you one example here or a story actually, that I've heard from veterinary technicians over and over and over again that really illustrates how chronic and devastating for these dogs their breathing impairment is. So when dogs are put under general anesthesia, they're intubated. So they have a tube that goes, down their throats and provides them with oxygen to make sure that they can still breathe properly during the procedure. And for the vast majority of dogs, they need to make sure that they remove the tube shortly after surgery, because dogs don't like having a tube down their throat. They'll bite it and they can get injured, and all these things can happen. But for English bulldogs and French bulldogs, veterinarians and vet technicians started reporting that after the surgery, the dogs would wake up with this tube down their throat and they would look completely relaxed. They would look into the dog's eyes and they would look more calm, more sort of centered than they had going into the surgery. And it's because for the first time in their lives, the dogs are able to breathe properly. And they report that after they take the breathing tube out and the dog is, gone to send home, they see the dog's entire body language, facial expression change because the dog once again is struggling and fighting to breathe properly. And they know that the ability to actually get a deep breath and feel what it's like to have their lungs filled with oxygen was only temporary.
So they're not happy dogs, and the owners have to see this, or the human companions have to see this change in their animal companions. Are you seeing people with pugs and French bulldogs saying, "We can't take care of this," or warn people? I guess you say that there are owners of pugs who are out there very public about, "Hey, don't go down this path and don't get a pug."
Absolutely. So we've done PSAs with people who live with these dogs, and they can speak to better than anyone how much these dogs suffer for the sake of a smushed in look.
Yeah, and what about the AKC, the American Kennel Club? Because they're kind of like the breeders' shield. The AKC, and people think, oh well, then this must be official. This must be okay. But AKC is not okay, is it?
Absolutely not. In fact, there is no single person or organization in the country who is responsible for inflicting more suffering on dogs than the American Kennel Club.
Mm.
And that's why in July, PETA actually sued the AKC for requiring breeders to intentionally breed dogs that have these deformed physical features that cause a lifetime of disease and disability. The lawsuit was focused on their breed standards, which they describe as the quote unquote blueprints for each breed. And the lawsuit focused on French bulldogs, English bulldogs, pugs, Shar-Peis, and dachshunds.
Yeah, Shar-Peis. I've been picking on the French bulldogs, but people love their Shar-Peis. I know, and it's like a kind of gourmet dog kind of thing. But Shar-Peis are not they say, oh, look how cute and happy. They're not happy, are they?
Yeah, you're touching on something that's so important, right? Which is that breathing impaired dogs happen to be the most popular of these deformed breeds right now. But really, any time people are breeding dogs at all, but especially breeding dogs to have these features that look just, I keep saying cartoonish, but there's really no other word for it. They don't look like dogs you see in photos from hundreds of years ago, and they certainly don't look like the wolves that dogs evolved from. Anytime you have dogs with these features that cause them suffering, it's inexcusable. So that's why, Shar-Peis, like you're saying, are included on this list because
Yeah,
excessive
yeah.
skin wrinkles cause them a lot of health issues.
I mean, wrinkly skin, most people would say not for me, but for my dog. Yeah, but not even there. But are the Shar-Peis, are they genetically engineered too to get that look?
So, like the breathing impaired dogs, they've been selectively bred year after year after year to try to bring out the most unusual, unnatural feature, which is this wrinkly skin. And for Shar-Peis, this means that they are constantly dealing with chronic skin infections. They have an autoimmune disease that comes from having wrinkly skin. And most disturbing of all, they're plagued with this condition called entropion because the
Mhm.
skin around their eyes folds inward. So their eyelashes actually point towards their eyeball instead of outwards. And
Yeah.
it is described by veterinarians as just absolutely excruciating, like having an open sore on your eye that's being poked every single time you blink.
So what we're seeing is that all these modifications from breeding, they come back in terms of these health issues. And you just mentioned the thing with the eyelashes, but there's also they can get soft palate, elongated soft palate. What is that?
So yeah, the elongated soft palate, I think hypoplastic trachea is the other thing that comes along with it. These are just two of the technical terms used to describe the symptoms of brachycephalic obstructive airway syndrome, which
Mm.
is a fancy way of saying the respiratory disease that French bulldogs, English bulldogs, and pugs are so likely to suffer from. 30 times more likely, actually, than all other dogs. And it means that they have that the soft tissue inside of their mouth extends too far backwards so that it actually covers up part of its throat, which, again, that's what's causing this labored breathing sound, the snorting, the rasping, the wheezing that all of us have grown so accustomed to hearing from English bulldogs and French bulldogs. But it's not okay. It's a dog suffering and struggling just to breathe.
Yeah, it's not cute at all. They also have dogs. It causes sleep apnea among dogs. I mean, human beings can relate to that. You get uh, heat stress, heat stroke, dental issues, the eye problems you mentioned, the skin issues with the Shar-Peis, the gastroesophageal reflux. So if they have a hard time digesting food and it comes back up.
Exactly. I mean, if you imagine an accordion that is open,
Mhm.
right? Or a plastic straw. This is how the dog's snouts and throats and internal organs are naturally. But breeders have basically taken this accordion and smushed it together, taken the straw and smushed it together in order to get them to have these flat, smushed in faces. But it's not just their snout that gets smushed in, everything does. So their internal organs, their lungs, it's all getting cramped because all of the internal anatomy is the same. It's just fitting into a smaller skull, a smaller skeleton. So that's why this is not just something that the dogs can kind of forget about. Every single day of their lives, they're suffering and they're dealing with the discomfort that's the result of people breeding them for these exaggerated looks.
Yeah. So these are the long lists of health issues. They're, really hundreds, if not thousands of dollars in vet bills to fix. And yet these are among the most popular breeds, if not the most popular breed, you're saying now? So we're talking about really tens of thousands of dogs, right?
Oh, absolutely. And there's a reason for that. And that's because breeders really don't care about the suffering that they cause these dogs. They just care about making money and lining their pockets. So they'll continue to breed these unhealthy, deformed animals as long as people keep buying them. Like smushed in skulls, warped spines, these are painful and life-threatening for these dogs. But the AKC explicitly tells breeders to seek out these harmful traits. And to just give a bit of context for how much money we're talking about, the AKC brought in $38 million in 2023 on these dog registrations. So this is a lot of money that they're making off of the suffering of these dogs.
Now, 38 million just for the BIBs or for all dogs?
The registration for all dogs, but considering that French bulldogs are the most popular dog, with English bulldogs following shortly after, dachshunds are on this list too, and breeds that we haven't even named, like Cavalier King Charles Spaniels, which have other really excruciating congenital health issues. These are all dogs who suffer in part due to the AKC requiring breeders to breed them with these unhealthy features. So a good chunk of that $38 million in registration fees is coming from people registering these purposefully deformed dogs.
Yeah, and that's if you register. Sometimes they're not, but we're talking millions of dollars to the AKC. But in terms of numbers of dogs, what would that be? I mean, we're talking a large population out there, deformed, unhappy, health problems, and out there in the population because we see them in the shelters, we see them in the rescues, but people want we want to be the original owner.
Exactly. And, the registration numbers change from year to year, but for the last 3 years, registrations for French bulldogs have been around 100,000 additional French bulldogs registered every single year. And each one of those French bulldogs is spending the majority of their life struggling just to breathe. I mean, another way I've heard a guardian of one of these French bulldogs describe it is that, who also happens to be a veterinary technician, that if you close your nostrils and close your mouth, like close your nostrils with your nose, close your mouth, and try to breathe like that, struggling every time to get oxygen and air past these blocked and closed off airways. It's not only is it uncomfortable and dangerous, it's a terrifying experience. One of people's greatest fears is drowning, and that's intimately linked to our fear of not being able to breathe because we know it's essential to our lives.
Yeah, what's funny is that people should know these things. They don't when they buy buy or they engage in getting a companion animal. But I'm just for me, just knowing what inbreeding, breeding, and incest, and what what that means. Just forget about dogs, and you don't want it for humans. You don't want it for any species. But if that's a product of a dog, I think I would, not get a French bulldog or one of these breathing impaired dogs. But what do you tell people who are stuck on it? I got to get those pugs are so cute. I mean, it's an emotional thing. I mean, you're trying to give people good information, but it's still this emotional thing for people. Oh, I want to get a French bulldog like my Aunt Nancy, or, how do you deal with them?
So I think it comes down to the question of, would we love our dogs any less if their coats were a different color, if their snouts were a little bit longer and healthier than they are, if they had, floppy ears instead of ears that looked straight, stood straight up? All of us who have spent time with dogs and love them know that each one of them is an individual, and we love our dogs because of who they are, not because of how they look. So anyone who is still in 2025 insistent on buying a dog who looks a certain way, it's not that I don't understand where that comes from, because obviously pop culture is a factor. They've seen movies. They want, a dog that matches their favorite sports team's mascot. But it just comes back to remembering that every dog is someone. They have unique personalities. And if you are ready to add a dog to your family, go to a local shelter and meet any of the amazing dogs who are just waiting for you to walk in.
Yeah, that really is the answer. I mean, you could get the French bulldog of your dreams, but if you knew about these negative things that go along with caring for a dog like this, and if you know what the dog's going through, you'd just go down to the shelter and get another one of those dogs, another a dog that's free of these kind of these problems. That's sort of the simple thing about if more people did that, that would help you in uh your your goal of trying to end BIBs, huh?
Absolutely. And that's why the solution here is so simple. It's to stop breeding and stop buying these flat-faced breeding impaired dogs, and for all of us to tell our friends, family members, anyone who will listen to do the same thing, because that's really the only way we are going to help prevent these dogs from suffering. And in the meantime, yes, if you're looking to have a you know, one of the most amazing things that can happen to you in your life, which is to have a dog, go to your local open admission shelter and meet one there.
Yeah, it's so true. I still like my idea of putting a tag on these dogs saying I'm a GMO, a genetically modified dog. I'm a product of incest. I'm a product of inbreeding.
Well,
Certainly you'll love me.
so the only reason that I think that I'm a little bit more hesitant about that idea is because it's less about where the dog comes from
Hmm.
and the type of experience they're going to have over the course of their lives.
Yeah.
So, where the dog comes from, meaning like whether they're this purebred dog or, selectively bred dog, really the thing that causes us to have this ethical concern about it is that they're being intentionally bred to have features that cause them to suffer so that these dogs will live in constant pain and discomfort.
Right. You got to go. It's the breeder who is, but you don't go after the
Yes.
breeders though, right?
Oh, we absolutely do. We absolutely do. So, Petland, which is one of the biggest sellers of dogs in the country. I think they are actually the largest retail um, seller of dogs. They're based in Ohio, and they, in the most despicable way, advertise their sales of dogs as adoptions. And just this fall, we sent a cease and desist letter to Petco demanding that they stop doing this. And after they didn't listen, we filed a complaint with the Ohio Attorney General's office. So we absolutely, try to address this problem at the source as well. Part of it is public education and letting people know what these dogs are going through just for the sake of an extreme look. But we also make sure that through, legal and legislative avenues, we're solving this at its source, which is the breeders and the pet stores.
And how about what municipalities or states are considering laws or where you're pushing legislation through, where you're maybe not 100% there yet, but you're really working hard and lobbying, and it may be imminent.
So we have a number of cities on both the West Coast and the East Coast that are considering this. You know, we're also seeing some great things happen internationally. The UK at the federal level. I'm actually not sure if they call it the federal level in the UK, but at the
Yeah.
level of the nation, they're considering more restrictions on the breeding of these flat-faced dogs. The Netherlands, where they've already banned the breeding of these dogs, because since those bans have gone into effect, they've seen more of these dogs imported. They're actually considering a ban on the ownership of these flat-faced breeding impaired dogs. It would, of course, if you already had a French bulldog or an English bulldog, the dogs, of course, would live out the rest of their lives. But it's just a sign that more and more people and more governments are recognizing that if we have cruelty to animals laws that prevents people from, beating their dogs, how could it be morally justifiable to breed dogs with features that will cause them far more pain and daily suffering over the course of their lives than someone beating their dog?
Yeah. So things are happening. This is now, um, what's your goal? How long you want to take this campaign? And when do you think you'll start to begin seeing that turnaround where, oh, we're downhill now. We're going downhill.
So we already are seeing big changes in public awareness, and that is always sort of the first domino to fall. I think in a way, the fact that these dogs have become so popular so quickly have helped more and more people realize, because more people have actually interacted with these dogs now, that these dogs suffer every day. They quite literally cannot breathe properly. So PETA, like with all of our campaigns, one of the things that makes us different than some other organizations is we will never give up on these animals. We'll never accept that, the breeding has slowed down a little bit. We will continue this campaign until people are no longer breeding dogs and no longer breeding impaired dogs. And we're already seeing great progress, and all signs point towards that progress continuing.
Great. Hey, Jakob, congratulations on taking this campaign and moving it forward. And I look forward to talking to you more about this. But really, thank you for being part of the PETA podcast.
Thank you so much, Emil. You're always keeping me on my toes, so it's a pleasure.
All right, Jakob, really, I've enjoyed talking to you because I thought, oh, breeding impaired dogs. I talked to Colin about that, a couple years ago, and you know, what's left? There's so much more, right? And
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, and for me as a person of color, right? You mentioned breeding. You mentioned, genetically. You think of ethnic purity. You think of, all those kind of issues, and there's just something repulsive about the idea. They do it, it's repulsive if it happens to humans. It's repulsive if it happens to dogs. And,
Oh, absolutely.
so I have a sort of a visceral reaction to the idea. Before we get to, oh, they can't breathe. They can't, they can't breathe. Although in Tibet, I had a relative who passed away recently, and there was a question: do we intubate? Do we not intubate? And he did not want to be intubated because that's sort of like the beginning of the end. Now you're on life support. He was just on oxygen. He was just on oxygen, just right there at the nose and mouth level. But the intubation is real, and I can't imagine a dog being intubated and then being the story you told. Now here, took it out. Now you're back to your old life. You can't breathe. Oh, I was able to breathe before.
Yeah, it's so heartbreaking. Your heart just breaks for these dogs when you think about the fact that they have no control over the anatomy that they're bred with.
Yeah.
We had a billboard once that was really fantastic, uh, that showed a woman who had a bandage over her nose from plastic surgery. And it said something along the lines of, you can choose a nose, you can choose to get a new nose, they can't. because, there's nothing that these dogs can do to change their own position and improve their well-being, which is why we really need to go after the breeders and prevent them from sentencing these dogs to lives of suffering.
Do you still have that ad? Do you still use that ad?
Yeah. I mean, what's old is new again. So we always try to bring back some of our billboards because, people have short memories and we need to remind them.
That's effective because it speaks to the vanity issue of why people get these kind of dogs. And, and if you hit that chime inside people, they say, oh yeah, yeah, maybe for me, not for the dog. And then they get your message. Anyway, I think it's a more important issue than most people realize. And I hope that they get that sense after hearing you talk about it so passionately. So thank you, Jacob. Really.
Oh, thank you, Emil. It's really my pleasure. I mean, I wish people knew how really grotesque this world of breeding dogs and showing dogs can be. Like, to just give you one more example, pugs have these curled tails, and the AKC breed standard describes a quote unquote double curl tail as perfection, in their words, when the curled tail is actually the result of a spinal malformation called hemivertebra, where their vertebral discs are turned to the side, which can cause them to actually lose mobility in their back legs. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, they're directly telling people to seek out these features that cause disease and disability. It's just unimaginable that anyone who actually cares about dogs and their well-being would support these breeders.
Jakob Shaw, PETA's lead on the Breathing Impaired Breeds campaign. Just imagine you hold your nose, you hold, you shut your mouth, and you try to breathe. That's a pretty good impersonation of a breathing impaired dog, a pug, a Shar Pei, a French Bulldog. That's why torture breeding must end. For more on breathing impaired breeds and Jacob's campaign, go to PETA.org. And that's our show for today. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to send a link of the show to your friends. Really, tell them you liked the PETA podcast. You can contact us at PETA.org. You can see me at amok.com. Once again, thank you for listening. Check out all our episodes on your favorite podcast app. Mine happens to be CastBox. You can get all the episodes. Or you can go to Apple Podcasts, where you can subscribe to as well as rate and review the show. It helps get the word out about the issues you care about. Our music is provided by Carbon Works. Check them out on YouTube. That's them playing in the background. And join us again next time for more insight into animal rights and the fight for a cruelty-free world on the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo.